Okay, so I don't know how many of you have read Brett's book Cold Black Mornings, but it's, first of all, it's
Hang on, how many haven't?
okay.
You haven't?
We'll be quizzing you later.
God, it's really good, by the way.
And available.
It's really good.
So my feeling was, first of all, it's not a typical rock memoir at all. I kind of felt it was really about provincial Britain. And, you know, what it's like to grow up there. It's extremely evocative, and it felt like it was this kind of side of Britain which we all know, but isn't necessarily always written about. And that was my take on it. And it just absolutely captured that feeling. And the first thing I wanted to say, Brett, is the character I found really fascinating was your father.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I've got this wrong, but was there a touch of Keith from Nuts and May to it?
I often did used to describe him, to compare him to Keith from Nuts and May, yeah. Lots of characteristics. That kind of like sort of small town, kind of like controlling kind of figure. No, the book actually started off, the idea for the book actually started off as it was going to be a kind of a sort of portrait of my father. And I kind of wrote a short version of the book which was just about him, and I just sort of started writing more, and it kind of expanded and became a kind of like a childhood memoir. But the first thing that I didn't want to do is I didn't want to do a conventional rock memoir. I wanted to sort of try and subvert the genre to a certain extent, and so I decided very, very early on that the book was going to end when we got signed, because I thought that, well, that's a very symbolic moment in a band's career when they get signed. It's the first moment that they become accepted in the wider sense of the word, sort of thing. And so I thought that'd be kind of quite an interesting moment to end the book, and also I thought it was quite bloody-minded as well, to end it at exactly the point most people start, you know, and just to annoy people. That was my intention. Well, it's always been my intention, so hopefully I'm achieving that.
Well, it's sort of, I suppose people would be expecting these stories, which you get from rock fame, but actually what you get from the book, like I said, is this very different thing. You get this really, like I said, it's a portrait of provincial Britain, and someone who feels outside of things. And I think that was something which I felt about Suede anyway, but really came across in the book.
Yeah, no, that was exactly the intention, that it was very much a book about being poor and marginal and powerless in kind of like 1980s Thatcher's Britain, I suppose. So, and that's where lots of those songs, early Suede songs, came from, you know, that sense of being marginal and excluded and all of those things. And I took it into the 90s, and you know, it was very much about sort of documenting the world I saw around me, and that world kind of happened to be Britain, but it could have been anywhere if I'd have lived somewhere else. It wasn't. I think that kind of whole notion became sort of slightly distorted and hijacked and became Britpop and taken on by other bands. But the idea was that it was about documenting the world I saw around me, which happened to be Britain.
I suppose the difference with Britpop was that Britpop became celebratory, and actually there's this great sadness to the Suede songs, yes. and just the mood, and this is the same in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key difference for me. You know, when people want me to compare and contrast Suede with Britpop,
as they do every now and then.
You know, when I'm doing an essay about it or something like that. No, but seriously, that's the key difference. That ours was a documentation of Britain, and the bands that came later was a celebration of Britain. It was never, you know, it was a very, very different mood. You know.
So I just want to go back to your father, because like I said, it's this kind of massive contradictions. You know, you had this guy who had, you know, he's a working class guy.
Yeah.
Great love of classical music. Seemed to be very controlling. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not. There's one line in the book where you say that, you know, he always needed to know where you are, to the extent now that you can't go to the toilet without telling your wife.
I always tell her when I'm going to the toilet. I don't care. Yeah, he was a massive contradictions. You're right. He was extremely. I always felt he was born in the wrong age. He was one of those people. He was born in the wrong age and to the wrong class as well. He would have been an amazing lord, a kind of a great mad lord. You know, he should have been Toulouse-Lautrec or something like that, turning up to breakfast in a suit of armour or something like that. But he wasn't. He was born to a kind of very sort of quite brutal military family in the 1940s, and he kind of educated himself. He wasn't educated formally. He just sort of taught himself about culture and about classical music and all of these things. And he was an interesting contradiction, a series of interesting people. That's how I always describe him. You know.
And did you feel, the difference when Suede started making it, and there were all these London bands who seem to be very much in the centre of things, is obvious. But how about Enchanted? Because, you seemed, you just said it yourself, in a way it was a kind of weird, classless situation, working class but not working class.
Yeah.
How did you fit in, as a kid with other kids at school? Did you feel,
Yeah, well, that's an interesting
things?
thing. I mean, look, what's one of the sort of things that I wanted to get across in the book was the way that I didn't ever feel that we fitted in as a family when I was a kid, when I was growing up. I was born in a sort of like council estate, but it was kind of council estate on the edge of a pretty village. So it wasn't like a kind of like Hackney tower block or something like that, but it was a kind of like very there was no money around or anything like that. We never fitted in socially. My parents' values covertly kind of like aspired towards the middle class, and we lived amongst working class people. So we were always sort of seen as too sort of like aloof and kind of like posh to be part of that community, but we weren't posh enough to be part of the middle class sort of further into the village or something like that. So I always felt that we didn't really fit in, and that kind of outsiderdom is something that I kind of used thematically a lot in lots of Suede songs. There's lots of songs where I'm looking for my tribe, from things like So Young to We Are the Pigs, and later things, especially songs like Trash and Outsiders and all of these songs. And it's very much a quest for a group of people that feel the same way as me, because I never felt as though I fitted in any sort of like particularly popular society as a child.
When did you first see signs of a kind of a wider world that you could relate to, whether that was through music or through other people or through literature? What sort of age were you at when you saw that there are other people?
I suppose when I sort of like went to kind of sixth form college, I met people like Matt Osman, who's the bass player in Suede, and when I sort of started meeting those kind of people, those very influential people in my life, and later going on to university, meeting people like Justine Fishman and the rest of the band as well. So forming a band was very much a sense of kind of getting together with a group of people that were like-minded, and that was almost like a sort of family substitute, I suppose. And there's lots of parallels you can draw between families and bands. I think they're your kind of like family that you decide to sort of gather around you, I think, when you're a young man.
And how about the first sort of musical discoveries? I mean, is it true that Nevermind the Bollocks was the first album you bought?
It is, yeah.
Are you sure it wasn't the Best of Dance?
No. It's far too cool for school, isn't it? Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? It was actually the first album that I bought, yeah. It wasn't Billy Joel's An Innocent Man or anything like that.
I came later.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. It was, yeah. Well, I paid for it with my paper round, and yeah. I mean, the Pistols still are possibly my favourite band. Listen to those records now, listen to something like Bodies, and it's still so vibrant and so exciting. It has that thing that great rock music has, that it doesn't matter when it was made, it doesn't matter that it was made 40 years ago, it still feels so incredibly relevant now. It doesn't feel dated in any way. I think great rock music and great art generally is about accessing raw emotions. And if you access that in the right way, raw emotions, love, loss, anger, hatred, passion, all of these things, they're just things that human beings feel, and human beings felt that in 1978, they felt that in 1878, It's the same sort of thing like when you look at a great painting from the past, like a Holbein or something. You look at Holbein's paintings, and they were painted in the 15th century, and you can walk down the street after looking at a Holbein painting and see people with the same expressions. And there's a timelessness to certain artists, the way they can capture, the way they can capture and document the human condition. And great rock music does that as well in a slightly different way.
So in a way, what you're saying is that human emotion, the essence of humanity doesn't change.
Yes.
Everything else changes, but when it comes down to it,
I think
you recognise the look on someone's face, and
I think it's true. I think I think we're, as a society nowadays, we're slightly. It's slightly misleading what happens, how we sort of view our relationship with technology, because we're seduced into thinking that we're more sophisticated than we are because our technology is more sophisticated. But as people, we're not more sophisticated than people who lived 100 years ago. I don't think. I think there's a basic sort of human kind of condition that goes that sort of like lives beyond the moment in lots of ways.
Well, on that note, there's a line, and I think it really surprised me. I think you're talking about an album which I can't remember the album. You're saying that you realised it was about love.
Yeah.
What's the album you were talking about?
No, I was talking about 1984.
Right. So that's right. You're talking about 1984.
I was talking about the book 1984, and what I particularly loved about it, and of course the political resonances are kind of incredible, and seem to be more and more relevant with every passing year. But at the core of it, there was a love story, and that was what really spoke to me. And the way that the kind of like the wider sort of meta political structure of the book was kind of like was sort of like arranged around a love story, and I kind of like learned very, very early on that in order to speak to people most powerfully, you have to sort of speak about human emotions, and that's why I've never written songs about kind of agriculture in Kenya or something like that, because it's sort of
There's always the concept album.
yeah. I mean, who knows? Maybe the next record, but it's always been about those things that kind of have been written about a million times before. Love, lust, loss, passion, these kind of things.
Well, the things you think about, essentially,
Yeah.
when it comes down to it.
Exactly, the things that really matter to you, and that's why there's so many songs that are written about love, because it always feels like a fresh emotion.
So you're coming from, let's say, sixth form. You're in Haywards You're not in a place where, I can't remember if it was you or Bernard Butler, but I remember reading someone say that when Suede started, they'd come to London and they'd see all these long-haired guys with guitars on their backs that their parents had bought them.
Yeah.
And I thought, we've got to fight those guys.
Yes.
There's this, so what I want to ask is, coming from this place, which I think you described as kind of in between land, slightly nowheresville, you could kind of look up the train track and imagine London at the other end.
Yeah.
The reality of doing a band and doing it for a living, that's a very, very tough call.
Yes.
When did that seem like a viable possibility?
It still doesn't.
Still waiting.
Sometimes, yeah. I don't know. I had a kind of a strange, sort of misguided self-belief, and I don't really know what it was based on. I didn't have any kind of training as a musician. I wasn't a particularly gifted singer or any of these things. I had to learn my craft. The one thing that I did have that I kind of recommend people, that anyone who wants to sort of go into anything really tries to develop, is a kind of an inability to see when I was beaten. I just kind of I didn't give up. Yeah, every time we failed and fell flat on our faces, and that happened many, many times, I can assure you. We picked ourselves up and just started again, and I don't really know if that was belief or stupidity. It's kind of like there's a bit of a fine line, isn't there? So yeah, I don't know. It's an odd thing looking back at how I ended up being a musician, because I certainly had I didn't have any early aptitude or training or anything like that.
But it was clear to you that that's what you should be doing.
Yeah, I always had this sort of thing that even when I was at university, that I was just there in order to meet people to be in a band with. Really. I just sort of saw university as a way to kind of access like-minded people. That was as close as I could get.
It seems like the first kind of way into an extent of this, maybe like a sort of more fashionable world, bohemian world, certainly a richer world, is when you meet Justine Frischmann.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're going from this rather kind of squalid little flat to a beautiful house, I think it's in somewhere in West London.
Yes, in Horton Street, yeah.
So what did what was that experience like, and how did that affect Suede?
Well, Justine was a hugely influential person, for me personally and for Suede as well. It's kind of interesting because she left the band before we kind of anyone knew who we really were, and so when we first appeared, she wasn't there, and so it's kind of almost like digging back into ancient history to sort of pinpoint her relevance. But she was she obviously, for me, we were together for a few years, and I learned a lot from Justine. She was one of the first sort of sophisticated, worldly people that I'd met. Having come from the suburbs, and suddenly I met someone that was very much sort of somehow summed up London. She had that sort of sense of sophistication and worldliness that London has, and she brought that to the sort of ethos of the band as well. She was very much her role as a. Her role wasn't so much as a sort of key musician. I don't mean to do her down in that sense. She was playing second fiddle to Bernard, and Bernard's a kind of virtuoso guitar player, but she was just as key in a completely different way. Sometimes it's how you edit these things. that's the most important thing. It's not, you know, you can have a million ideas, but if you don't sort of wheedle out the rubbish and pinpoint the good stuff, then it's meaningless. You know, she was able to do that.
I think there's a